Dictators don't work alone, and there were men Adolf Hitler depended on. In their own ways, each of these members of Hitler's inner circle worked toward his goals of German expansion and the genocide of the Jews. Albert Speer was an architect by training, but as a Nazi official, he was in charge of armaments. Speer doubled Germany's weapons production. To achieve what many described as an armaments miracle, he used the assembly line manufacturing techniques of American businessman Henry Ford, who was admired by Adolf Hitler for his anti-Semitic beliefs.
Ford blamed the Jewish people for everything from World War to short skirts, cheap movies, and jazz music.
But it wasn't all just Ford ingenuity that accomplished it. You see, Speer used the forced labor of prisoners from Germany's concentration camps in production. So the armaments miracle was really more of a nightmare. Though he was close friends with Hitler, Speer lost faith in him as it became clear Germany would lose the war when Hitler announced the Nero Decree of 1945, which mandated the destruction of German infrastructure so it couldn't be used by the Allies. This was too much for the architect.
Albert Speer's modern branding and design makes National Socialism look coherent and a vision of the future.
Not only did Speer refuse to carry out the decree, but in early 1945 he obtained poison gas from an armaments factory with the intention of assassinating Hitler in his bunker. As he testified years later in the Nuremberg Trials, quote, technical difficulties prevented him from carrying out his plan. Joseph Goebbels became adept in public relations when he joined the Nazi Party.
This extraordinarily intelligent man was one of the most evil men in history.
He was a writer and wrote for the party newspaper, and was good at stirring up political agitation. He would send Nazi stormtroopers into neighborhoods where he knew the people would resist, then publicize the fighting, celebrating the fallen soldiers as martyrs. These tactics earned Hitler's admiration, causing him to promote Goebbels to the position of Minister for Propaganda and Public Enlightenment in 1933.
Hitler is seen by many Germans as just a small-minded, thuggish rabble-rouser. Goebbels tries to recast him as modern, dynamic, and optimistic.
Goebbels' job was to sway public opinion by controlling what Germans read and didn't read. While the official Nazi publisher churned out millions of copies of Hitler's memoir Mein Kampf, Goebbels created a list of banned books that didn't align with party views. Speaking at a book burning at Humboldt University in 1933, he praised the, quote, cleaning of the German spirit by burning books written by Jews, foreigners, and pacifists. He used print, radio, and television to extol the German values of self-sacrifice and racial purity while denigrating Jews.
The Nazi Holocaust would not have been possible but for Goebbels' state control of the media.
In a 1935 speech, Goebbels said that Jews were subhuman and bent on destroying Western culture, and by 1938, Goebbels was sanctioning acts of violence against them. By the time industrial genocide was organized by the party, Goebbels' media strategy had already paved the way for the public to accept it. Having served as a pilot in World War I, Hermann Göring joined the Nazi Party in 1922. With his military background, he was appointed head of the SA and fought alongside Hitler in his unsuccessful coup called the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923. Shot and wounded in the battle, Göring developed a morphine addiction he would deal with most of his life. Still an avid supporter of Hitler, Göring used his high society connections to help elect him to parliament. He was rewarded for his efforts. Once Hitler was appointed chancellor, he appointed Göring to the top political position of Reich Minister.
The Nazis are giving Göring everything he ever dreamed of. He's got status, he's becoming an important man.
He is credited with creating the Gestapo, and Göring was later appointed head of the German Air Force in 1935, and held that position through the end of World War II. Though Hitler appointed Göring his successor as early as 1939, he stripped Göring of his titles when he tried to assume power too early in 1945. One of Hitler's last acts was to expel Göring from the Nazi Party, which he wrote in his last will and testament. Heinrich Himmler was still a university student when he began reading propaganda. Embracing the ideology of racial supremacy, Himmler became a Nazi Party member soon after his graduation in 1923. He left his job at a manure factory to work as a secretary for Nazi propagandist Gregor Strasser. Go ahead and insert your own joke there. Anyway, Himmler caught Hitler's attention and rose to become the head of the SS, the Nazi Party's political army. Under his leadership, the SS swelled to over 50,000 members by the time Hitler took power in 1933.
He's nothing like most of the members of the SA who were tough guys. You know, they were street fighters. He's the wimpy kid.
Himmler's theories were out there even by Nazi standards, like that Germans could be traced back genetically to Atlantis. An efficient bureaucrat, he impressed Hitler with his management to the first concentration camp at Dachau, which actually began operation in 1933. He eventually assumed control over all of Germany's camps, which at the height of the war totaled 40 main camps with hundreds of subcamps, and so Himmler became the architect of the Holocaust. Reinhard Heydrich was Himmler's protege. He was trained as a violinist, but developed an interest in the growing National Socialist movement in Germany towards the end of World War I. He enlisted in the army after high school rather than pursue a music career. Heydrich met Himmler in 1931 and soon became head of the intelligence faction of the SS, known as the SD, and the Gestapo. He was in charge of investigating and incarcerating all the enemies of the Nazi Party, including communists, Freemasons, and Jews. On Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, which took place overnight between November 9th and 10th, 1938, Heydrich ordered the Gestapo to arrest thousands of Jews and then had them deported to concentration camps. This was only the beginning of a plan that Heydrich championed called the, quote, solution to the Jewish question, the annihilation of 11 million Jews across Europe, which Heydrich promoted at the Wannsee Conference in 1942. Heydrich might not be a name as remembered as other Nazis, but he should be on your radar for just how evil he was. Hitler called him the man with the iron heart. Look, if Hitler thinks you're cruel, you're a really bad guy. Martin Bormann was Adolf Hitler's private secretary.
He was the faithful manager and fixer for his idol.
He didn't really make headlines. Instead, he worked behind the scenes to make things happen, and Bormann's signature appeared on key documents that included orders to deport Jews. He also played a role in the euthanasia program, which sanctioned the execution of adults and children with disabilities, considered by Nazis to be a burden on the state. Through mundane tasks, Bormann was able to exercise power over Hitler. For example, he created the Adolf Hitler Fund for German business to raise official funding, and he also handled Hitler's private assets.
It's Martin Bormann, Hitler's enforcer, who's coming out on top.
He gave Hitler a German shepherd named Blondie, who became the dictator's constant companion. Bormann oversaw the renovations of Hitler's mountain retreat in Obersalzberg and then moved to a nearby house within view of the estate. By monitoring the comings and goings, Bormann became Hitler's unofficial gatekeeper. He also kept Hitler's appointment calendar, which he deftly manipulated to limit Hitler's time spent with other members of the inner circle whom Bormann considered rivals, including Albert Speer, Joseph Goebbels, and Heinrich Himmler. Rudolph Hess first heard Hitler speak in 1920 and became a devoted follower. Arrested along with Hitler in 1923 during the beer hall putsch, he became Hitler's confidant in Landsberg prison. Hess transcribed as Hitler dictated his memories, grievances, and beliefs, thereby creating an early draft of Mein Kampf. After Hitler took power, Hess was named Deputy Führer, a figurehead position, but his reliance on astrology and interest in telekinesis caused him to lose respect in Nazi circles.
He was constantly outmaneuvered by rather more clever members of the Nazi Party like Himmler, like Goebbels, like Göring.
Though devoted to Hitler in Germany, Hess was worried about Hitler's plan to invade the Soviet Union while still fighting France and Great Britain. He also attempted to negotiate Britain's surrender on his own, in secret. A pilot, Hess flew a single-engine bomber plane to Scotland in 1941, aiming for the residence of the Duke of Hamilton, whom he mistakenly believed would be open to negotiating with the Nazis. Just as an aside, what is often overlooked is how crazy Hess's plan was. The Duke of Hamilton, a guy named Ian Hamilton, was about 87 years old at the time and had zero influence to negotiate anything. Anyway, Hess got lost and ran out of gas. After parachuting out of his plane, he was captured and held prisoner in England, spending some of that time in the Tower of London.
Questions were asked in Britain as to who knew about Hess's flight beforehand.
Hitler, upon hearing the news of Hess's aborted mission and subsequent capture, stripped him of his titles and left him to serve his time as a prisoner of war. In April 1945, as Russian troops marched toward Berlin, Hitler was hiding in his bunker under the city, surrounded by his closest allies.
It was really game over. It was the very last, very brutal moment of a dying empire.
It was there that Hitler married his longtime mistress, Eva Braun, on April 29th. The two of them died by their own hands one day later in order to evade capture by the Russians. Reinhard Heydrich was the only member of the inner circle to die before Hitler. A joint Czech and Slovak operation pulled off an assassination attempt in Prague in 1942, and he died of his injuries a few months later. Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler were under house arrest, and Rudolph Hess was sitting in the Tower of London as a prisoner of war. Albert Speer was absent from the bunker, but was later captured in the northern German city of Flensburg by the Americans. Martin Bormann and Joseph Goebbels were with Hitler in the bunker until his death. Bormann stayed long enough to settle Hitler's affairs, then disappeared. It's generally believed today that the Soviets discovered his body and buried him after he chewed on a cyanide capsule. Goebbels' story is particularly chilling.
For the deeply fanatical Goebbels and his wife Magda, escape doesn't even enter their minds.
Together, he and his wife, Magda, poisoned their 6 children with cyanide before the couple took their own lives. A post-mortem showed the oldest child put up a fight before chomping down on the capsule. Following the war, the International Military Tribunal convened in Nuremberg, Germany to try Nazi leaders for war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity.
Göring's defense was, I'm here because we lost the war. If we'd won the war, you would be here in the dock.
Göring was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death at Nuremberg. The court denied his request to be executed by firing squad, after which he took his own life to avoid a death by hanging with what is believed to be a smuggled-in cyanide capsule. Martin Bormann was found guilty in absentia, but was never apprehended. His body was finally positively identified in 1973. Rudolph Hess survived prison in England only to be transferred to Nuremberg, where he was sentenced to life in prison. There, after 40 years in captivity, he also died by his own hand at the age of 93. This was not without controversy, and there are still some conspiracy theories that say that Hess was eliminated because he was going to reveal sensitive information detrimental to the British government. That's almost a whole nother story, so leave a comment if you want us to break down Hess's time in prison. Testifying in Nuremberg, Albert Speer claimed to know nothing of Hitler's plans for the Holocaust. He was sentenced to only 20 years in prison for crimes against humanity, and afterward retired to England, where he wrote books and made a massive effort to position himself as, quote, the good Nazi. However, a letter surfaced after his death that proved his claim was a lie. A 1971 personal letter revealed the ruse. There is no doubt. I was present as Himmler announced on October 6, 1943 that all Jews would be killed. Who would believe me that I suppressed this, that it would have been easier to have written all of this in my memoirs?